Hello and welcome to China 24, and this is a special broadcast on the ongoing two political sessions in China. Since the Chinese government created the idea of the new normal last year, economic structural transformation has been encouraged amid slowing growth. And tonight we look at how enterprises are coping with the new economic challenges and how the reforms in fiscal and taxation are now affecting the structural transformation. But first, Finance Minister Lou Jiwei has said China's new fiscal policy needs to be expansionary in the changing time. This morning he gave details about 2015's fiscal policy and other important issues such as local government debt. Our reporter Yang Chenxi starts us off.
China is ramping up its fiscal policy engine to boost economic growth in the country. Finance Minister Lou Jiwei echoed Premier Li's previous announcement that China's fiscal deficit ratio will be expanded from 2.1% last year to 2.3% this year during his morning press conference. Lou said that such proactive fiscal moves are necessary to combat downward pressures on the economy.
All countries around the world are in a deleverage process, including China. But while we do that, we also cannot allow economic growth to be hurt too much. The Chinese economy is slowing down, and we're also facing depreciation risks. That's why the government's fiscal policy going forward must be expansionary.
Such a proactive tone requires a healthy balance sheet for the government, and it makes the issue of local government debt more important. Minister Lou said an audit of local government debt is still in progress.
Local governments were not allowed to raise debts on their own before the launch of China's new budget law last year, but they did. We need to take action to prevent these existing debts from causing systematic risks to the economy. According to our assessments, the debt levels are still within a controllable range.
To digest existing local government debt, Minister Lou proposed that local governments use the public-private partnership program to include private sector players in various projects and let them shoulder some of the debt. China's comprehensive fiscal reform concerns the health of the country's public and private sector. Officials say it's a fundamental way to balance the relationship between the two, and is the most important relation that determines China's future growth. Yang Chenxi, CCTV, Beijing.
And for more, we're now joined by our reporter Su Yiting, who is now standing by in downtown Beijing. Good evening, Yiting. Well, the Ministry of Finance just touched upon the issue of personal income tax today, the threshold. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so Finance Minister Lou Jiwei has called for reform on individual income tax system. Currently, individuals earning under 3,500 yuan per month do not have to pay income tax. And in fact, 3,500 yuan was too low for people living in big cities such as Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou, where many young people's monthly home mortgage payments were even higher than 3,500 yuan. Some NPC and NPC deputies and CPPCC members suggested the government to raise the exemption to 5,000 yuan. And Finance Minister said it's reasonable to make a change, but it's not fair to simply further raise the exemption threshold. And government will also consider more methods for citizens to apply for tax reduction and reimbursement in raising families, education and medical treatment. So
Thank you very much, Yiting, for your reporting from downtown Beijing. And now some discussions about China's economy. Joining me in the studio is Mr. Carlos Smits, Senior Economist in Macroeconomics and Fiscal Management from the World Bank, and Professor Zhu Ning, Deputy Director of the Shanghai Advanced Institution of Finance from Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. My first question is about the local government debt. It is said this time that is around 100 billion yuan level. What do you make of this level of local government debt? Do you think it is still solvent at this time?
Well, I think it is still a very serious problem that is facing Chinese economy. And it is not just the size that is concerning, it is the speed at which I think the level of debt has been increasing over the past few years. And at the moment, I don't think there's any crisis or there's no meltdown in the market. However, if things were allowed to grow at this pace, I think it is going to be a very serious issue, especially given the slowdown in the economy and also the faltering real estate prices.
But look at the structure of the government debt. Most of them are used for local infrastructure construction. The local government said, well, for long-term benefits might be worth it. Mr. Smits?
That's correct, because some of the benefits are over the long term, but also we have to look at the incentives. And some of these local government incentives are misaligned, and some of that infrastructure is being allocated in places maybe where the money could have been used much better by, for example, building schools. So maybe there is a misallocation of that infrastructure stock, and we see some evidence that is the case.
There is a term called PPP, private-public partnership. Is that the right way to solve this problem, to have private funds joining in the local government's expenditure?
Yes, I think the PPP has become a common and widely used way of using private capital into helping in infrastructure projects in the West and some other emerging economies. I think one key issue that people have to pay attention to, though, is I think the setup of the contract and the information disclosure, because there's a lot of I think one important assumption is the law would have to be upheld, and the information has to be very clear and transparent. So the project has to be well defined, the cash flow well protected, and also the arrangement of the deal should be kept the same as the project going forward. So I think it is definitely a very promising direction for people to take it in China, but it has to be implemented in a proper way.
But looking at those infrastructure projects, maybe the revenue is for long haul. What is the incentive for private investors to go into that area?
I mean, one incentive in a lot of these private-public partnership is so-called value for money. The rationale is that the private investor is much more efficient in building and especially maintaining that particular infrastructure stock, being that as, for example, airport or road. So there's an incentive for private operator to be more efficient. So that's one important incentive. And also for local governments, they don't want to be in a business, for example, in managing airports and a lot of other these provision of these public infrastructure services. So that is a rationale for these public-private partnership, which is also used in some other countries, also both developing and developed. And we have to be also cognizant, because a lot of these deals rely on a very strong disclosure of financial statements, also legal framework. They're more successful in advanced countries, but also there are good examples in developing countries that have used PPPs.
As you both said, legal framework and transparency may take some time to build. So have you seen any on-the-ground progress in different localities about this program, PPP?
You mean in China?
In China.
I think there has been some pilot projects being going on.
For example?
I think in some of the infrastructure projects, from what I've read, in the Yunnan provinces, they are trying to implement such an idea.
Okay, we'll talk about a little more about this later on. First, let's come back to the tax reform in this country. Well, how do you think the tax reform is going to be transforming the Chinese income and revenue structure? A list of tax reform actually have already been compiled at the third plenary session of the CPC Central Committee in late 2013. Well, director of the Institute of Physical Science of the Finance Ministry briefed the media about the progress on Friday. Well, China is now working on legislation on property tax and environment tax. Plans on consumption tax also expected to be unveiled this year. Researchers say they will continue to work on reform plans of individual income tax. Two other taxes from the list are already in place. In December 2014, China began a resource tax on coal based on price rather than the traditional basis on quantity. But the tax rate will be decided by the provincial governments within a 2 to 10% range. China began a pilot program to replace business tax with a value-added tax in early 2012 in Shanghai. Well, that scheme was adopted nationwide in August 2014. Under the plan, the companies will pay taxes only on the value added to a good and service during each stage of the production, instead of on its gross revenue. But that means smaller tax bill for businesses. Well, let's talk about tax reform. What is the philosophy behind the tax reform? What is it aiming at?
Well, I think tax is like one of the most important policies a country made about its economy. It's about how resources are being divided and also what's the incentive system. So I think for China, the reform is probably aiming at two areas. One is basically trying to reduce the burden of enterprises and individuals so that they can have greater incentives in engage themselves into business or into entrepreneurial activities. The second, I think, is efficiency. How to better align the interests of the business with that of the people and that of the nation. I think, for example, the resources taxes. I mean, some of the SOEs enjoy very clear advantages just by having access to natural resources, which is actually owned by the whole population. So to better allocate these resources, it also will give some check and balance on how the resources can be used and how will those benefits be shared among the rest of the nation.
Is this in line with the big picture that China wants to upgrade its industry and want to give those entrepreneurial a better play, Mr. Smith?
That's correct. I mean, one of the overall objectives is also to let the market forces play more decisive role, and fiscal policy, particularly tax policy, is an important instrument of unleashing these market forces and also addressing some of these market failures. For example, environment and excessive natural resource use is a market failure, so the tax is an important instrument to internalize that cost of pollution, so these companies are producing less of that polluting products, for example, coal, etc. So that's also will trickle down also to the manufacturing. And again, the VAT is a similarly to equally make the taxes less distortionary, that it kind of unleashes entrepreneurial spirit. So that is in line of letting the market forces more decisive role and industrial upgrading.
Globally, what is your sense of China's tax rate?
If you look at the size of the government and comparing to large OECD countries, it's about the same. And then if we look at the composition of that, how these expenditures are distributed, we see significant differences. China spends significant amount of expenditures on so-called economic activities, transport, infrastructure, where a lot of OECD countries spend a large share on social expenditures, health, education, and also pension. So we see, although the size is very similar, the distribution of expenditures differ.
Quite different. Yeah. All right. Well, China has long understood that reform is needed in different areas if the country needs to progress to the next stage. Well, it isn't going to be easy. After all, asking anyone to bear the cost of reform is a daunting task in an economy that is in transition. Aware of this, top managers of country state-owned enterprises are trying different ways to rally their staff behind the reform. And Fu Chengyu, chairman of Sinopec, is one of them. Well known for action and not just for words, he sat down with my colleague Tian Wei and shared the realities of reform he is facing up to.
Earlier, the Chinese premier gave out his government work report, and specifically he's also talking about the SOE reform. Which part do you think would benefit more Sinopec on your path of reform?
You know, we talk in corporate governance in the past for years, but in the top level, it is very good. But in the down road, there's a lot of work to be done. So this is related with our employment system, like management in all the levels. You know, we need to make them more market-oriented, which will mean that you're working well, we will continue to sign the contract. If you're not well, you can go. But we don't have set up such a system. So with this system changed, I think all the mentals or the attitudes of the employees and the management will change. So we are not there yet.
Everybody would understand that because it takes a lot of effort. Because you're in a way punishing those that are not doing the work right. And that is very, very difficult for any long-time organization.
And also the resistance is also very strong.
What do you think about what do you think about the resistance? How are you dealing with the resistance? This is not just with your company, it's everywhere.
When you talk to the people, say we are going to take reform, they say, well, that's good. However, when they take their interest or something against their interest, they will become resistant. That's why when the government say that we are entering into a deep water section.
How are your swimming skills?
It's not that good. So I'm very careful when you really taking reform, enter into the deep water section. You have to make very active but slow processes that to make sure that everybody really understand what you do. Everybody really understand what they are going to do. So that we have to mix together.
And you have to rally the public.
Have to.
I mean, on the one hand, you're going to take away their interest. On the other hand, you're persuading them to be with me on the same boat. That's almost mission impossible.
You have to say it this way. For a short period of time, some of those interests will be impacted, but you cannot let them interests being impacted for the whole life. So this is for a period. After this period, their interests should be protected. So when you design your reform, you will make sure every employees have their own way to grow their career. And then you will let them know afterwards, we have such a new system. Each of you, if you want to work hard, you will have your own way of growth your career.
And you're now watching a special edition of China 24. Two years into the current leadership, China is deepening reform. The plans are bigger and the stakes are higher. How best to reshape governance and promote the rule of law? How can growth be realigned while slowing down its pace? Will China and the rest of the world march in concert? Tune in to hear what legislators and advisors say. Join us for our annual special coverage of the NPC and CCPCC sessions, right here on CCTV News.
China is undergoing unprecedented reforms.
And for its people, it's a time of change and contrast.
What's been accomplished since last year?
How are the policies affecting their lives?
We crisscross the country from north to south,
from the east to the west,
looking at the pressing issues
and what's being done to deal with them.
Join us for Agenda in Action on CCTV News.
Well, for the past 3 decades, the Chinese economy has been growing at a fast speed, very fast. The world has even termed this the Chinese economic miracle. But now with signs of a slowdown, people are asking, can the miracle last? Well, the Chinese leadership has given its answer. The new normal, which means not just slower growth, but more importantly, better quality growth. Simply put, China is moving up the value chain. And few understand this better than Chinese economist and CPPCC member, Mr. Lin Yifu. He is a former chief economist and senior vice president of the World Bank. And let's hear what he had to say about the new growth engines for Chinese economy.
Despite growing labor costs, China still has many relative advantages. First, we can move from mid and lower end of the spectrum to mid and higher in the sector of equipment manufacturing. Secondly, the internet sector has become increasingly dynamic in China with the emergence of internet finance, e-commerce, and delivery businesses. Third, the green and new energy sectors are growing. Fourth, the issue of overcapacity can be solved through investing in infrastructure along the One Road and One Belt. So under these conditions, I believe we can achieve the 7% goal this year, and I believe we can do even better than that.
Well, China says innovation is the core route for development. And that's something the government is emphasizing as the way out of the economic slowdown. And our senior correspondent Han Bin visits a research institute in the eastern province of Jiangsu. There, he sees how a new energy-saving material is likely to fundamentally transform the country's energy picture.
To get into the laboratory, you have to be dust-free. We are about to get an inside look at a model for innovation in China. The focus is a special material called graphene. It could be China's future for green alternative energy. Graphene is a single layer of carbon atoms in a honeycomb lattice, the thinnest material in the world, yet strong and flexible. Graphene has exceptional electrical and heat conductivity. It was first isolated in 2004, and China invested quickly to commercialize it.
Graphene production is a very profitable industry, not just because it's an emerging strategic new material industry, but it can also upgrade and transform a lot of traditional material industries.
The Jiangsu Industrial Technology Research Institute began product development in 2011. Deputy Director Hu Yidong says graphene's advantages are clear, and they expect to make some 5 billion in sales over the next 3 years. Graphene makes this copper alloy rod stronger than titanium. It makes the cell phone touch screens more sensitive, and graphene's anti-corrosion properties help batteries last longer.
Innovation is the key to improving our industrial competitiveness. Scientific innovation can break the bottleneck of growth. Without the support of industrial upgrading, structural transformation would be impossible to achieve.
Innovation is seen as the major driver for China's economy. Yet, China is far from becoming an innovative country. Transformation will take time, and government policies will decide the directions.
Government funding is crucially important for innovation. For any innovation, there's a risk of failure, especially in the starting period. So, government support can effectively reduce the risk of enterprises and encourage them to keep testing innovative products. This is something the government is supposed to do and do well in the future.
The country has already got over 100 patents concerning graphene products. The city of Changzhou is building a carbon valley like California's Silicon Valley. The industry fits Beijing's goal to make China a global power. Graphene is still a relatively new material, but full commercialization is on the fast track, because innovation depends on application to succeed.
Backed by favorable government policies, funding, and world-class research, China has become the global leader in graphene applications and production in only a few years. This high-tech investment has already brought remarkable benefits. Successful stories like these are a major factor for the government's belief that innovation is the key to economic development. Han Bin, CCTV from Jiangsu Province.
So for more talks on China's manufacturing, both old and new, we bring in our senior correspondent Han Bin to our studio. Well, Han Bin, thanks for talking to us on this. You've been traveling across the country, meeting entrepreneurs from the manufacturing industry. There are both furniture workshops and high-end factories like this graphene production line. What is your take on their different adaptation to the new normal?
Well, I have to say the negative impact to Chinese industries, especially the manufacturing companies, can be much more severe than what the government indicates. There are many medium and small-sized companies have been shutting down. A lot of workers have laid off, and they are waiting for the new opportunities. Those companies used to be very successful because it's based on the very low labor cost and large-scale production. But now the biggest question in their head is not how to transform, it's actually how to survive. And the government's blueprint for innovation, structural transformation remains to be a blueprint. It's still a long way to go.
So you also visited this graphene production. It is a high technology company. It probably will be a new breakthrough in industry demand. What do you think the government needs to do to foster an environment that can nurture their growth?
I think it's a very good question. The policies are not very clear now, although the direction is very clear. I think the graphene is very successful, but a rare case But the importance for this is that it is a successful model that can be copied, and we can see that model as the hope for China's future. It is built on the successful three factors. It is a combination like the government funding, which provides the initial fund like this, is the 50 million yuan for the seed money to carry out that project. And there's an institution to carry out research and development, and there is a company to promote that product. So the key is the project and also the initial money, but investment for money is always a risk. And I think the government work report regarding to innovations had a lot of encouraging new policies, like provide subsidies, support business acquisitions, 40 billion yuan government funding, and institutional innovations. These are all sounds very encouraging new policies, but the question still is how long it will take and how we can do it right.
So it's not just a link, it should be a chain.
I do think so.
Full package. Thank you very much, and thank you for your remarkable stories. Well, there is another side of manufacturing. China is raising the share of the service industry in its economy as part of the structural reform. Of all the industries involved, companies once as polluting industries are now the first to feel the impact. And our reporter Ning Hong in Hebei province visited private business owners who are now starting new ventures.
Li Shunhai is over 50 years old. He closed the paper mill he had run for over a decade and started this agricultural tourism park.
The paper mill produces pollution. The government is controlling pollution, and the profit was running low. This agricultural park for tourism has a better future, I think. It may not be as profitable as making paper, but I prefer it for the long run.
In Lushan City, many polluting factories were shut down in the past years, with a particular large number in 2014, when cement plants were blamed for being a major source of smog. This gave the local government a chance to adjust its industrial structure. Near Lee's Park, a colony of agricultural sightseeing parks is springing up.
We tore down the polluting factories in line with the industrial policy, but many people lost their jobs. We are doing our best to help them get into new businesses.
Like the agricultural sightseeing park Li is in, Industrial Park is becoming a mainstream model for service industry in China. Most are initiated by the government, which is also giving startup companies much support. The transition from manufacturing industry to service industry here often means that people have to give up their long-held jobs and throw themselves into completely unfamiliar territories. Many are forced to do so, but some have foreseen the trend, which makes it easier to adapt. Ning Hong, CCTV, Hebei Province.
Well, China's economy has grown by leaps and bounds over the past few decades, but it still has potential to modernize by reforming its structure. Well, the service sector, for example, has beaten the manufacturing as a major contributor to employment since 2011, when it took up 35% of the employment pie. Well, this share maintained a stable increase in the following years by reaching 38% in 2013. 2013 also was a turning point in the country's restructuring efforts. For the first time, the share of service industry in GDP surpassed that of manufacturing, reaching 46%, well, 1 percentage higher than the share of manufacturing. Well, the trend has been continuing since then. In 2014, the service sector contributed 48% of GDP, higher than manufacturing sector in China. And now, more talks. We're now joined by Mr. Carlos Smith and Professor Zhu Ning once again. Well, Professor Zhu, we just saw an example of how a high-end manufacturing business has successfully adapted to the new normal. But not a lot of companies can manage to do that. So what is your advice to them? How can they upgrade?
I think I probably have two pieces of advice. The first is they have to think more about the future. I mean, some of the companies which have managed successfully migrated into the higher end manufacturing are those which always worry about, well, what's going to happen if Chinese labor costs are going to be much more expensive than it is today. And I think that mentality pushes or forces some of those companies to think harder about how would they maintain their competitiveness in the next 5 years, maybe in the coming decades. The second, I think, is quite important for many Chinese companies is, I think, talent development. So it's to have meaningful R&D, you have to have very resourceful human capital. And some of the companies, they're either not able to or not willing to invest in their own employees. I think that's a common mistake that's being made by many Chinese companies. So I think for China to have more fruitful progress in those R&D or higher-end manufacturing products, I think would have to invest more heavily into making our employees more knowledgeable and more innovative.
So, Mr. Smith, do you think the Chinese manufacturing owners have realized maybe the good old days are gone forever?
I think they have, and there's a paradigm shift. There's a shift from this notion from made in China towards created in China, where these managers of these companies have to think on their own what kind of products consumers would want. They would have to come up with their own ideas rather than taking existing technologies, existing products and mixing with the cheaper labor here in China and producing. So these days are gone, I think, and everybody, so most of the managers understand that. So there's a shift, fundamental shift to the higher value added manufacturing, and also shift to the services which you mentioned. So that means the rules of the change have changed, but also actors have to change, either their behavior or new actors should come in.
Let's talk about the shift to service. Of course, now service sector has already outstripped manufacturing, but there are some problems at the same time because the training of those people, are they well equipped to do service? What do you think needs to be done? Is it the job of the government to provide training or those enterprises?
I think one of the big issues or challenges in that transition to services that we don't see transition to these so-called high value added services. We see that productivity in service sector is still lower than in manufacturing. So we see that this labor is transitioning to lower productivity activities, and one reason for that is example that you mentioned, that labor force or human capital is not adequate to shift to the higher value added services. And there is some things the government can do in a short term, for example on the job training programs, etc. But there is more challenges in terms of in the long term. It has to do with the educational system and mobility of labor, and we also seen reforms in making sure that these rural educational system for these migrant worker kids are adequately prepared for the future economic structure where human capital will be playing more.
And do we have those right programs in place in different areas to train those manufacturing workers?
I think we do at a certain point, but then I think we have to work harder in those areas, because let's keep in mind many of Chinese educational systems are prepared for taking exams, not for taking jobs. So I think there is a big shift in starting from maybe high school or junior high. People have to think harder about, well, what am I going to do with my life, and is that a necessary step that I would have to pass those exams, or I should better prepare myself for a more meaningful job in the future.
Maybe a change of mindset is
exactly,
also
that's very important.
Well, China has been encouraging its young entrepreneurs to spur growth through their innovation. In the government work report, Premier Li Keqiang encouraged both individuals and enterprises to innovate. He said the culture of innovation and entrepreneurship needs to be embedded. And he also said he promised the government support for innovation and entrepreneurship. And in that report, our correspondent Jing Qiao takes a look at how one up-and-coming business was able to combine innovation with traditional Chinese culture.
Jianbing, a traditional Chinese snack often sold for less than $1, and now a hit among white-collar workers in Beijing's business district. And like the iPhone, their reputation has soared, in large part thanks to the internet, growing bigger than bigger.
I think it's a mix of fashion and tradition, and makes people feel like curious about brands.
It's because of the times.
At the helm is the 33-year-old founder He Chang, an internet veteran who's worked for Google and Baidu.
Now you're the boss of the world's top-selling Jianbing store. But how did you start to do it in the first place?
Our generation grew up surrounded by Western foods and brands. But do our kids have to do the same by eating hamburgers and chips? Why not try and make traditional Chinese things fashionable again, in a new form that they can accept?
With no TV commercials or billboard advertisements, the company Huang Taiji has attracted over 100,000 followers on Weibo, the Chinese version of Twitter. After 2 years, they now rake in 1 million yuan in monthly sales.
It's not just Chinese traditional foods that are being recreated and repackaged here. It's more about a culture that they try to promote and sell here in this restaurant. You may be able to attend a lecture by the restaurant's owner on aliens, and in the future, you may also be able to attend a jianbing competition, just like this.
This new lifestyle is a result of close interactions between the company and consumers on social media, a strategy at the heart of many success stories. Xiaomi, for example, now China's top-selling smartphone maker, has an online community where its fans' voice can be heard by the company's research staff. And a restaurant called Diaoye Beef, it became white-hot in Beijing by inviting celebrities to dine and share their experiences on Weibo.
Customers can find us on Weibo. They can experience in our stores. We enhance customers' experience also by tracking their habits. We turn customers into fans and fans into friends.
It's because of our country's economic development, the transition of the service industry, but most importantly, mobile internet. It has transformed our lives. We have a small jianbing shop in a remote corner of Beijing, but it can attract a lot of people from across the country.
A new flavor to a traditional snack, all part of China's rejuvenation of domestic brands. Jing Yingqiao, CCTV, Beijing.
Well, this is a typical example of how young people begin their own businesses. This is what Premier Li Keqiang has been saying. The government wants to encourage those startups and innovations. But let's come back to the reality. While the demand is sluggish, the credit is expensive, the labor cost is going up. What is the drive for those young people to start their own businesses? What is the risks there?
Well, I think there are both sides to the decision to start a new business. On one side, I think, as you mentioned, I think the demand is sluggish in a way that, well, many young people find it is becoming harder and harder to find a decent or high-paying job in the regular sectors of the economy. So they have their own share of passion and dreams, so they want to start out something new. But on the flip side, I think it is actually not a bad time because, I mean, given the increasing size of Chinese middle class population, I think they have different demands and they have a larger demand than before. So that's creating a lot of niche market which can be satisfied by those entrepreneurs which start something that's very small and very unique in the beginning, but as long as there's enough interest and follow-up, I think there is a lot of potential in growing small businesses into a publicly listed company.
Are you so upbeat about Chinese startups and their entrepreneurship, Mr. Smith?
I think this is a part of that changing industrial structure. It's not only in terms of the sectors, but also what kind of enterprises will drive the growth. In the past, we saw that in China, large enterprises were typically the key drivers of growth. And I think when the economy is maturing, the importance of these small enterprises is going to increase because they are the ones that are more likely to innovate. These are how ideas are being born. Therefore, creating an environment that encourages those startups is very important.
What does that environment look like? What did they expect from the government, from other sectors of the society?
First of all, it's enabling environment, clear rules of the game, and also what is more important, these factor markets, access to the capital, access to labor, access to the land, for example, which is more difficult in this environment than for large enterprises. For example, access to credit is still arguably favored to these large enterprises. Small enterprises, banks are more reluctant because there's a lot of risk. So that these factors will play a more important role. And secondly, for government, it's very difficult to pick which of that startup is going to be successful. Therefore, these direct programs directly supporting political enterprises are usually not very successful. Instead, government needs to work in addressing these distortions in the capital market, for example, in access to the finance and also in the labor market, so that if you are a good entrepreneur somewhere in rural China, you can come to Shanghai or Beijing the next day and start your company.
And still, finally, it takes your gut and entrepreneurship to start a business. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, and thank you very much, Mr. Zhu. This is the first official year for China in the new normal. Like any other time in the world, this brings with it both challenges and opportunities. There is no doubt that these will be discussed and may be adjusted every step of the way, not just in China, but around the world. In the final reckoning, it might be that has become a watershed in China's rise to economic self-sufficiency and recovery. And that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Hello there, watching Worldwide News. I'm Jing Yi. Well, first there are updates in on the rainfall in southern China. It'll still be very widespread on Saturday and Sunday as well, and most of it will be light rain showers except in northern Zhejiang, eastern Jiangxi, part of Hunan, and Guangxi. There will be some moderate rainfall even. Well, despite the continuous rainfall, the temperatures here will be rising because some moist air coming from the south will make it warmer and warmer in the next 2 days. We can see from this forecast that though there will still be continuous rainfall on Sunday, high temperatures are obviously higher than before. They are rising from below to near normal level. Especially in Jiangnan region, the average number for this time of year is usually 12 or 13 degrees. So right now, people there feel it warming up. Well, for northern China, here is a different story going on. On Saturday, there will be once again some snow showers from eastern Heilongjiang, Jilin to part of Inner Mongolia, and plus some gusty winds here as well, generated by the next frontal system. And then on Sunday, the snowfall there will strengthen into locally moderate to heavy snowfall even. This is the forecast for Sunday. We can see Harbin will still have a chance to see snow shower and light snowfall in Shenyang. So people here really still have a long way to go to climb out of this cold and wet weather for winter. So that's all for now, and stay tuned for City Forecast.